A lot of it is just concentration and focusing on what the right part is for the song and making sure that the artist is happy. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what I think. The artist is the one that's hiring me, and if I'm not giving them what they need, then I'm not going to be called back.
Lee, thanks for joining us. When I look at the list of people that you have played with and you're currently playing with, this has got to be pretty overwhelming at a certain point to you, right?
You know, it's a job. I look at it every day. You know, I'm happy that someone wants to pay me to actually play drums and do what I love. So.
In the beginning days, was music in your household?
Actually, no one in my family is a musician, so I don't know exactly what happened, but somewhere around the age of 2 or 3, I was reaching into the kitchen cabinets and pulling out pots and pans and taking Tinker Toys and making drumsticks out of that. And my mom would set me in front of the stereo and put on the radio, and I would just bang on pots and pans. And I did that for a couple of years. Somewhere around 5, she said, you know what, maybe I'll get him a couple drum lessons and see if this is worth my while. And so she signed me up for 4 lessons, and I took 4 lessons, and then she signed me up for 4 more, and I took 4 more, and then 8 and 16, and I never stopped all the way through college. So that's kind of how it started.
How beautiful. So the lessons that you had, you started out working on snare drum and practice pad and certain books. What was that? That was a very typical kind of lesson?
Very typical, yeah. It was a lot of practice pad, which at 5, you don't realize how bad you actually are.
Yeah.
So it was a perfect time to start, because if you start a little bit later, sometimes you hear the music and you understand that I'm not really cutting it. But at 5, I was just happy to have sticks in my hands. So it was a lot of practice pad, a lot of snare drum. My legs could barely touch the pedals. So my drum teacher, who was in Rochester, New York, a guy named Alan Heberling, was great. He was going to Eastman School of Music.
Yeah.
And he would put me at the drum set, but most of the time we were just working on snare drum and practice pad.
But that's amazing. In the Rochester area, the influence of Chuck Mangione and Steve Gadd, and
Yes.
Eastman School of Music, and
Yes.
John Beck, and all these phenomenal musical influences that were there. You came from an area that was pretty rich musically.
Yes. It's one of those things, at that age, I wasn't really aware of it. I mean, I was aware of the music school and I was aware of Chuck Mangione, but Steve Gadd, when I was growing up, hadn't really broken out yet. He probably moved to, I'm not exactly sure what year he moved to New York, but he moved about the time that I moved to Miami, and I was 10 years old at that time.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really aware of him
Yeah.
while I was there, but Chuck Mangione, we used to go see him play at the high school. So, things like that, he was just around. He was a local hero.
He's still a local hero.
Oh, yeah, no, of course.
Absolutely. You're taking lessons, you're getting some more confidence in your playing. You start playing with other musicians?
Not at that age. I mean, I was in Rochester, I was there till I was about 10 years old. But my drum teacher he was a huge Chicago fan. So I'd be playing Danny Seraphine, all the time.
Danny, what a great player, yeah.
And so, at 6, 7 years old, I'm learning 25 or 64. Does anyone really know what time it is? And these songs, and so I'm being influenced by amazing music and amazing drummers that, I don't realize how important it was, to myself actually growing up as a musician. Because I was so young, I had no idea, how important those bands were, but he was a fan. And I'd go watch him play with bands, little, club dates here or there, and he'd invite me to go out and, it'd be a bar, and here's this, 7 or 8-year-old kid sitting in the corner with his parents. But it was an excellent opportunity to see how a real musician works. So that was helpful.
Interesting. So the music, first of all, this band Chicago, great influence to have at that young an age.
Oh my God, yeah.
This was like a jazz, rock, horn section, intense arrangements. This was a really magical time of that to be influenced at that time.
Yeah.
So playing professionally, when did the professional?
Well, I moved to South Florida when I was 10 years old. So I was in school bands and things like that. But right about the age of 13, I was in, some middle school bands, just garage bands. But right at the age of 13, my mom found out about this big band that was sponsored by the police department. And it was called the Metro-Dade Police Jazz Ensemble. And it was a bunch of cops that originally started it. And then they needed some ringers because, they were cops during the day. So they had some college students, and then they had some high school students. But they were holding auditions. They needed a drummer. I was really young for the band, but she took me down and I auditioned and I ended up getting the gig. They had 2 drummers, and I was one of the drummers at 13 years old playing big band music.
What great experience.
Yeah.
What great influence at that young an age.
Yeah, well, and the thing was, the leader, his name was Don Arney, and he was a police officer and trombone player, and he sang, and he's a cop, and I'm 13, and he's yelling at me, "Don't let those guys drag you down." And you got 5 trombones. There's nothing slower than 5 trombones. And at 13, he's yelling at me, don't let them drag you down." And I would go home sometimes in tears from concert. We played concerts almost every weekend.
Yeah.
In parks and things for the city, whatever. But it was a really great learning experience because you had to grow a thick skin. You had to learn how to drive the band. You had to be in charge. My statement is I'm the bus driver. I don't make the bus route. I didn't invent the bus, but I'm the driver, and that's I'm the one that has to get all the passengers there safely.
How interesting.
And and he taught me that.
That kind of discipline at an early age, I'm sure that's been pretty helpful to you.
Oh, absolutely.
As you've gone on. Talk about your level of discipline, because to play with the artists, you've got Barbra Streisand, Madonna, Kelly Clarkson, Michael Bolton, Sarah Silverman, Meatloaf, Julio Iglesias, Ricky Martin, Shakira. You've got so many artists in here, Barry Gibbs. You need a certain level of discipline.
A lot of it is just concentration and focusing on what the right part is for the song and making sure that the artist is happy, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what I think. The artist is the one that's hiring me, and if I'm not giving them what they need, then I'm not going to be called back. Right. So it's about concentrating and making a musical environment for everyone else to play in, everyone else to sound good, and make them feel comfortable. Because it's the confidence that comes from the band and from my chair that makes them feel comfortable and allows them to do what they need to do. So to me, that's the most important thing, and hopefully that's what I bring to the table when they hire me.
Beautiful. So talk about now the professionalism of now you start to become a professional musician now. You take lessons, you've played with these local bands. Where did that next step happen?
I think I took a really traditional path. I took lessons all my life, was playing around town. Luckily I grew up in a town that's got the University of Miami Music School.
Yeah.
That's, I was going to see concerts there. I was seeing, the great bands and the great musicians. You had Pat Metheny go through that program, and Bruce Hornsby, and just countless awesome musicians that were around, and my folks were bringing me to concerts and seeing these guys play. And it was sort of like, this predetermined path that I was going to go there. It was right in the backyard. It was such a great music school. Yeah. Although my parents did, even though my heart was set on University of Miami, they're like, listen, you're from Rochester, Eastman School of Music is there. I had gone to the Eastman Summer Jazz program when I was 16.
So you were aware of what it was about.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And it's an amazing music school. But so they said, you should audition up at Eastman School of Music. I'm like, all right, so go up to Rochester, and I set up for the audition. John Beck, of course, is the professor, and he's doing the audition.
Brilliant man, brilliant
great.
Man, yeah.
I do my timpani, and I do my snare drum, and I do my xylophone and my marimba and all the stuff that because it's at that point you could only take jazz as a master's program. There was no undergraduate, so it was legit. For your first 4 years, if you wanted to go to music school.
So you learned all those instruments.
Yeah. And
understood the theory, and boy, that's a very important part.
Yeah, I was taken from Fred Wickstrom at the University of Miami and Steve Rucker at the University of Miami while I was in high school. My mom was really on top of things and getting me prepared for college. I auditioned for John Beck, and I did all the classical stuff, and I was good, but I wasn't great. My heart wasn't really in it. It's not really what I wanted to do. So as soon as we were done, with the audition, he's like, okay, thanks very much. I appreciate your time. And I'm like, don't you want to hear anything on the drum set? And there was a drum set in the corner. It was actually the Steve Gadd model. Steve had given him the drum set. It was a black Yamaha set sitting in the corner. And I'm like, don't you want to hear any drum set? Oh, you play drum set? I'm like, yeah, that's my instrument, really. And he's like, oh, okay, sure. And I sit down at the drum set and I play a bunch of stuff from the Rick Latham book and and do a couple of things.
Advanced Funk Studies. So you knew all those books. We'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah,
So you played?
So I played for him, I don't know, a couple minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. And then I stop and he says, have you ever thought about going to the University of Miami? Just like that. And he was honest. He's like, you're legit playing? But drum set seems to be where your heart is, and I followed my heart. I went to University of Miami.
What did your parents say about that?
No, well, they figured that was going to happen anyway. But, you know, as a Rochester boy, go to the Eastern School and
Yeah.
try it, you know, that kind of thing.
How fantastic. All these books you went through. Talk about some of the books that you went through, because you know, a lot of the drummers that are out there are looking to build their career and understanding, and sometimes understanding how you develop what you do.
Right.
And you're an incredibly skilled, you know, player at many levels. So what books did you study from?
You know, the ones that everybody has, the Ted Reed syncopation book, Accents and Rebounds, Stick Control, the Rick Latham book. I mean, I've got so many books at home that, you know, I went through lessons, but, you know, any of the books that I went through, they were all helpful on some level. But, you know, those classic ones.
So books like Advanced Techniques for the Modern Drummer by Chapin.
Yep, Chapin.
New Breed.
In
and
fact,
books
Jim
like that.
Chapin has signed my Advanced
He
Techniques.
signed your
Yes, I
copy.
have it,
That's
yep.
powerful.
Yeah, so I have that one. But and it's funny because when you look at them now, I've got the dates, you know, like 1975, 1976, and I'm going through that book as a 9-year-old or an
Boy, how
8-year-old.
great.
Yeah.
But listen, the influence of being able to being exposed to that material,
Right.
and just starting to plant the seed at that young an age, this is
Right.
a very important part for, you know, our audience to listen to and understand that. That's, you know, studying and going through these books. The books have knowledge, and that's an important part of the learning process.
And learning how to read. I mean, that was important.
Absolutely. Do you chart out arrangements
Yes.
when you go out? I mean, how do you work that out?
Well,
when you
most
go
of the stuff I do now is studio stuff. So yeah, I've never heard the songs before. I get it for the first time, and I make my own charts. I don't do it on music paper anymore because it just doesn't seem to make sense. I do them actually on notebook paper.
Nice.
So I've got these chicken scratch charts, but I, you know, I can read music. Someone puts it in front of me. In fact, when I moved down here, the first teacher that I had was a guy named Daniel Sell, and he was doing his master's at the University of Miami, and more of a legit player. And my ear had gotten far ahead of where my reading was. And he took me all the way back to the beginning, and I was mad. I hated it, and but it was really important. And to this day, I still see him every now and again, and I thank him every single time because I'm able to read tons of stuff. I mean, if you put the black page in front of me, I'm not going to do well. But I can read a chart, I can, you know, do a big band thing, whatever, and pretty much on the fly because I had to go back to the beginning and really learn that stuff.
You know, it's funny you mentioned the black page. For those who don't understand the black page, that Zappa piece that Bozio and Colaiuta and Chad Wackerman and Ralph Humphreys and Chester Thompson, all these great drummers,
And not Lee Levin.
and nor Don Famularo for sure, to go in there and read this stuff and play it. I mean, that's really complicated stuff.
Yes.
But what you're doing is really, you know, core, you know,
Right.
playing is what's happening. Tell me about like when someone comes with a chart like in a studio and you start writing it out, you listen to it, you make your own notes. What do you kind of chart?
It depends on what kind of chart they bring me. Sometimes they'll bring me something where the drums are very specific and they've written out a drum part, or they printed it from a reference part that's in a computer. But oftentimes it's just a lead sheet.
So it's
I've
a chord
chart,
sheet, yeah.
yep. So I've got the guitar part or the piano part or something like that, and I'll make notes as to the rhythms. I'm very aware of the vocal. That's like the most important thing to me, because you know my job is to make the music sound good. It's not to just play drums.
Yeah.
So I have to be aware of the vocal, where when you're going from a verse to the chorus.
Yeah.
Where what the rhythm, the vocal may have a pickup. I don't want to step on that with a fill. You have to be really careful with that. So, I'll make certain notes depending on, the song. We listen to the song, and oftentimes in the old days, where you got to play with, 4 or 5 guys at a time, we'd discuss it, and especially myself and the bass player, are you going to do and a 2 on the kick? Are you going to do and a 2 and 3? Or, and we'd discuss what those things were. So you'd play it down the first time and, okay, next. Kind of thing. I mean, that's what you have to do. You get to know how other people play, and how to speak to other musicians, and knowing how to read and knowing about music and having the music education really helps. Because drummers aren't real musicians, so.
Well, so they say, but people like yourself are really proving them wrong. And even when I did the interview with Kenny Aronoff, Kenny does the same thing. He really kind of charts everything and saves the charts at his stacks of filing cabinets, and he has it. And so I guess what you do is you're listening to it from a full picture, musically what's happening, and then you are charting out spaces that you feel you can add to the bigger picture. It's
any kind of notes that I need to hit for some reason or another. I mean, oftentimes, if it's just a verse and it's 8 bars, I've got 7. written there, and I know that for 7 bars it's basically the same thing, and I get to decide where I want to open the hi-hat, or if I want to do something special depending on what's going on in the song.
Right.
But then on the 8th bar, if there's going to be a fill, I may put a particular rhythm. I don't chart out what the fill is, but just to know what the vocal's doing or what the rest of the band is going to do, so I don't step on that and we don't have cross clave or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah, it's really important.
But talk about the importance of concentration and listening, because that's a big part of, you have to hear all the parts all the time to know exactly what you want to add. Talk about that level of concentration.
Well, it's about listening to everybody. I mean, realizing that you're just one piece of the whole pie. And the pie doesn't taste good if there's too much of this or too much of that.
Yeah.
So being able to understand that I don't want to play something that's going to step on the piano player. If he's doing a fill in a particular place, I make sure I back off. And oftentimes, especially live, where it's a little more freedom, I'll play something and someone else fills at the same time, and I always feel terrible. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, I just stepped on that awesome fill that you did, and I messed it up for you. So being considerate of other musicians and making sure that everybody gets a piece. And luckily, with a lot of the session work that I do down here, it's a lot of the same guys. We kind of know how we play, and you get into this groove, whether it was the Wrecking Crew or whether it was Jeff Porcaro and Toto or whatever. You feel that the other person's style, and you're gonna just fit in, and they're gonna leave you space, and you're gonna leave them space, and at the end of the day, it's musical.
Absolutely. I love the research you've done. We speak about the Wrecking Crew and how Blaine, God rest his soul, I had a chance to interview him. It was a wonderful time to spend some time with him. Yeah. And what they did and the amount of songs that they recorded throughout the 60s and 70s.
Unbelievable.
Then you mentioned Jeff Porcaro and what he did with that studio scene that was incredible. Jeff, it was a dear friend of mine. I met Jeff in 1976, and it was just, and I witnessed several of what he did, and he had the same level of what you have. You have that same level of that deep concentration and that deep concern, what's best for the music, to serve the music.
That's always what it's about. I've never been a drummer's drummer. I never wanted to be a drummer's drummer. I love songs, I love music, I love being a part of the whole picture and not a focus of the picture.
Interesting. So who would you say some of your influences have been musically?
Oh my God. Everybody. But if I had to pick a couple, I would say Steve Gadd, for sure.
Yeah.
Jeff Porcaro, Carlos Vega, Stuart Copeland. I grew up kind of in that, late 70s, 80s, that was a big influence. But I've gotten something from everybody. I mean, there's, a lot of it is sometimes is bands. Earth, Wind, and Fire. Huge fan of Earth, Wind, and Fire. I mean, oh my God. I used to put on I had the greatest hits record, actual album, vinyl, and I would, when I was practicing at home, I'd put that on and I would pretend I was a member of the band, and I'd just be back there just, grooving, and it was so much fun. And I think, a lot of times people, they want to work on their time, play to a record. Especially nowadays, everything's done to a click. That it's so much more fun than a metronome. And you get to work on your time, and you get to think about the music, and you don't have to do the same fill the other guy does. But you know the lyrics, the vocals, and the rhythms, and you play along with that.
Boy, great advice. Liberty DeVito, phenomenal drummer, did just that. Records was his education. And when you hear the amount of knowledge that he has and the different fills that he has and the grooves and the creativity, it can come from that. So that's fantastic advice.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You have an incredible Latin influence with some of the artists that you played with. What kind of, how'd you research some of the Latin music?
Growing up in Miami, you didn't have a choice.
You can't help it,
you're here and you hear it all the time. It's part of the culture. I moved down at a time where it was the Mariel boat lift had just happened when I moved down. So, and I lived originally in Coral Gables, so there was a huge Cuban community. You'd hear the music on the street. My friends were Cuban. I remember going over to a friend's house, and I came home, I think I was 10 or 11 years old, and I said, Mom, you're not going to believe this, but the dogs understand Spanish. Because they're telling the dog to, be quiet, and they would say it in Spanish. And of course, I didn't realize that, the dog's just responding to whatever the owner's saying. But, at the time, it was, I had those friends, and you heard that music, and it just became a part of who I was living here.
What was it like going from doing session dates where it's a more confined, controlled atmosphere, to now going out and touring?
Actually, I did it the other way around first.
Oh,
So I graduated from University of Miami. I did music performance. At the time, it was called Studio Music and Jazz.
Yeah.
So I did that at University of Miami, but because my father was an attorney and, nobody in the family was a musician. So they were like, okay, you want to be a musician? That's great. However, you should have something to fall back on just in case this doesn't work out, because we've heard all the stories. And so I did music business as well. And my father thought, okay, you could get a legal degree, you could still be in the music business without being a player if it didn't work out. I graduated University of Miami in January of 1990, auditioned for a Latin artist named Cheyenne in February of 1990, and March of 1990 I was playing a concert in LA. Actually, his big breakout, he was in a boy band. This was the first really big album that he had after that boy band. And he was from Puerto Rico, and we went on tour for a year and a half after that. So it started with the touring, and just after I graduated college, so went right on the road.
What a wonderful story. So you're hitting the road, you're on the road, you're learning now the socializing, the family atmosphere with the band, you're doing sound checks, you're in the intensity of playing in front of large crowds.
Oh yeah.
How did you adapt to that?
You just have to. I mean, I'm away from my folks. You become a family, with everybody that's there, and you're playing with great musicians. I mean, everybody in the band was great. Some of the guys had more experience than I did. Some of them were guys that I had gone to University of Miami with. We auditioned together. You're rooming with them. We're in mostly Spanish-speaking countries, and I had taken Spanish during high school, but now is when I learned how to speak it. Because if you wanted to eat breakfast, you had to order in Spanish. Because at the time, in the early '90s, nobody down there spoke English, or very few people. So you'd have to order breakfast. You'd have to do it in Spanish. So you just have to adapt, and the schedule's crazy, and the buses are bad, and the planes are horrible. I mean, I have got pictures of them trying to jumpstart a propeller plane, on the tarmac with a car battery and jumper cables in Honduras, and I'm like, I don't care if it starts. I'm not getting on that plane. I don't care what anybody says. So you just deal with the situations, and it makes you grow fast.
It really makes us wonder. There's probably a book somewhere in there that you can write that could really have incredible stories, which would probably be very helpful for young musicians to understand the bigger picture of what it's like to be a musician.
It looks great from the outside, but on the inside, oof.
It's pretty intense.
Yeah.
What about compositions and writing? Because I know you do that. Where'd that come from?
Most of the time that comes from something that I'm either asked to do or something of need. I'm not one of these writers that has this burning desire. I've got these creative ideas I have to get out to the world. I'm more of a, somebody needs a jingle and they ask me to do it. Okay, 30 seconds. What's the style? What are we going for? EDM? Okay, great. And I bring out the machines in the computer and we write something, or background music for something else. I mean, it just kind of depends on what the need is. So I'm more of a, you need something, I'm your guy. Or hopefully I'm your guy.
Yeah. So with the experience that you have by playing mallets, keyboards, and everything, that was a very, very big help in an area that you probably never thought that would be there, but all of a sudden that side of you popped out.
Right. Well, and also, like we said before, listening. I mean, just listening to what other musicians do and understanding how music works and the flow becomes really important. Yeah. So I had to take piano at school. I took guitar. I'm bad at all of it except the drums. I'm pretty good, but the other stuff I'm good enough to write something down, or at least get the idea across for someone else to play it.
I enjoy your humility for sure. I'm sure it's a lot better than what you're saying because what you've done, and even educational books. Talk about the educational books that you have with Alfred Publications.
Gotcha. Yeah. So Alfred Publications was based down here. They still have a satellite office here, and there's a bunch of us that have been doing their books. They do a lot of Music -1 books. So if you remember the Jamie Aebersold stuff, they're doing that with all kinds of styles. So there's pop music. We do Christmas books. We do soundtracks where we have to emulate Danny Elfman music or Star Wars. We've done that book. So there's different kinds of books, and they hire us to put all the music together. We do the basic tracks, and then we get horn players or violinists or whatever to play the instrument part, and they end up making, I actually mix everything at my studio.
Nice.
And we end up putting those books together, and Alfred puts those out. We probably do 3 or 4 of them a year. Been doing that for over 20 years.
Yeah.
So that was one thing, and then I actually wrote a book many years ago about drum programming. They had asked me to to do that.
I remember that, yeah, sure.
So,
sure.
you know, it was a basic drum programming book, but I approached it as a drummer. So it wasn't just, this is how you program in the computer, but this is how a drummer thinks, and then this is how you program it on the computer. So for people that didn't play drum and had no idea about drums, which are most of the people that would need to program drum parts,
Absolutely.
that was the idea behind the book.
Well, it's amazing with all you've done and the Grammys. This is really a powerful momentum, Lee, when you think about it. That you've started this idea, you're still in the core of doing it. Yeah, knock on wood, as I hear for sure. In closing, what would you say to this next generation? You've got these young musicians that are out there that are inspired to want to be involved with music, they want to be involved with the music industry. What would you say to them to give them advice on preparation for them being future musicians?
All right, let's throw the talent and the hard work and the drumming and all that stuff away, because everyone is going to do that.
Yeah.
To me, you also need to bring your people skills. Be punctual. Understand that it's a service business. You are helping, you're giving somebody else a service. You're providing drum tracks for their music. This is their art. If you're going to do what I do, this is their art. It's not about me, it's about them. And I try and never give them an opportunity to call somebody else. Always provide 150% effort and make sure that they shine, and then you're always going to work. Because everyone's going to be, there's always going to be somebody that's a better drummer than you. I mean, it's just the way it is. And so you can't fight that. You have to bring the whole package and be a businessman about it.
So the balance of those artistic skills and those personal and business skills are really important to keep aware of that.
Absolutely. I mean, people have to want to work with you. I mean, if they don't enjoy it and they don't enjoy being with you, and you make them feel bad about whatever it is they're working on, or you're angry for one reason or whatever, that's not going to work out in your favor. So you need to always be available for them and realize that you're giving them a service.
With your reputation, it's always positive. You always give them 150%. It always comes back where people, they throw your name out and they know they're going to get incredible results. Lee, you're still doing this at a high level. Thank you so much on behalf of the sessions. You've done great.
Thank you. Appreciate it.